In Lebanon, earlier Hezbollah's deputy leader Naim Qassem said the group was ready for an Israeli ground offensive and that the battle may be long. The White House says there has been no change in America's support of Israel in response to the start of what has been described as a limited ground offensive in Lebanon, despite Joe Biden's call for the Israeli government to consider stopping the operations and his suggestion that a ceasefire deal be implemented now. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has spoken to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and called for avoiding regional escalation of the West Asian conflict. During the phone call that came days after Israel killed Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut, Prime Minister Modi extended support for Israel's fight against terrorism. In a significant diplomatic milestone, the Jamaican Prime Minister Andrew Holness is set to make the first ever bilateral visit by a Jamaican Prime Minister to India. He will be here till the 3rd of October. Russia is to increase its spending on defense by 25% to its highest on record as Vladimir Putin vows to continue his war efforts in Ukraine and further escalate his standoff with the West. A Himalayan river may be making Everest taller. Mount Everest is at least 15 meters taller than it would otherwise be and is still growing thanks to a nearby river eroding the ground. Well, our big focus, it was another sleepless night for Beirut. The Israeli military has just announced that its troops have begun crossing into southern Lebanon, saying that they would destroy Hezbollah military infrastructure and villages that are close to the Israel-Lebanon border. In fact, in a statement issued shortly before 2 a.m., the military described the operation as a limited operation and said that its troops had begun entering Lebanon a few hours ago in order to target sites that pose an immediate threat to Israeli communities in northern Israel. This invasion followed intense Israeli strikes across Lebanon over the past 2 weeks that have killed hundreds of people, including 95 just on Monday. Israel is trying to force a conclusion to a year-long war with Hezbollah that started in parallel with Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza, set off by the October 7 attacks on southern Israel. But in Lebanon, I must inform you, officials say more than 1,000 people have been killed. This is just in the last 2 weeks, while up to 1 million may now be displaced.
When Iran is finally free, and that moment will come a lot sooner than people think, everything will be different. Our two ancient peoples, the Jewish people and the Persian people, will finally be at peace. Our two countries, Israel and Iran, will be at peace. The people of Iran should know Israel stands with you. May we together know a future of prosperity and peace.
Well, what is unclear is how intense the combat may now be between Israeli forces and Hezbollah fighters. In fact, Hezbollah fighters are well armed and battle-hardened, even if their leadership has been decimated in the last 2 weeks. But for the Lebanese people, meanwhile, their fear is that the country as a whole could be engulfed in their bitter conflict. Hezbollah says it is ready for an Israeli ground operation. The IDF has said that a limited operation has begun. Dr. John Rooney joins us live currently. He's a military intelligence researcher. Thank you so much, sir, for making time for us on NDTV. The White House says there has been no change in America's support of Israel in response to the start of what has been described as a limited ground offensive in Lebanon, despite Joe Biden's call for the Israeli government to actually consider stopping the operations. An expert has actually argued that an emboldened Israel appears to believe it can safely ignore a lame duck US president. How do you see the latest developments in the last 12 hours?
I absolutely agree with that. I think that at the moment Netanyahu has played his hand very well. He has now timed this military enterprise at the time of weakness for the United States leading up to the US federal election or national election. And, you know, really, we've got about 5 months to play out because, quite frankly, whoever ends up in the White House will take some time to bed down. So whether it's Harris on the one side or Trump on the other, there won't be immediate capacities for any new US president to actually do anything about what's going on in the Middle East right now.
But nearly a year after he was blamed for Israel's massive security and intelligence failures surrounding Hamas's October 7th attack, some analysts are arguing, sir, that Prime Minister Netanyahu is actually winning. In fact, citing the latest polls show that if elections were held today, his right-wing party would finish first.
That's absolutely true. And look, I think that we in the international community, those of us who are outside of the Middle East, have to look at this with a bit of caution. All limited wars end up suffering from the horrendous side effect of mission creep. So at the moment, while Netanyahu may be riding high because of all the so-called victories that he's managed to score over the last week or two, the fact remains that a technologically sophisticated side always enters a war with the idea of being in control of everything, in being able to go in and come out at its choosing. I think that in this situation, the Hezbollah main force has not been dealt with. And don't forget, Hezbollah has a decentralized command structure. So you can take out the leadership, but there's always someone standing in their stead, ready and willing to replace that leader.
Crucial point highlighted there, sir. So Israel going ahead with this ground incursion, despite urgent calls from its main ally, the United States, not to do so. Does this clearly indicate that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu clearly believes the momentum is with Israel?
Yes, I believe that that's the case. I also believe that Netanyahu probably doesn't think too much of international opinion right now. He's riding high at the moment. Things are going Israel's way, but remember, they will go Israel's way until they don't. And in Lebanon, Israel has had a very checkered history. This will be the fourth time that Israel has gone into Lebanon. The previous three times, Israel did not achieve the kind of decisive victories that it sought to achieve. And I think that at each time they went in with the idea of being able to be in control of everything, that they'll go in and come out and have low casualties and everything will be fine. But it was never the case. And I suspect that this will be a case of history repeating itself.
Well, thank you so much, sir, for joining us with your perspective on the world 24/7. Really appreciate you joining us and taking out time for us. Well, Israeli troops moving forward into Lebanon is being viewed, meanwhile, with concern and caution in Washington. The White House says there has been no change in America's support of Israel in response to the start of what has been described as a limited ground offensive in Lebanon, despite the US president calling for the Israeli government to stop its operations and his suggestion that a ceasefire deal be implemented now. Asked whether he was aware of or comfortable with the Israeli plans, Joe Biden has clearly told reporters, "I'm more aware than you might know, and I'm comfortable with them stopping." He in fact added, "We should have a ceasefire now," but last week the American and French governments announced that a deal had been reached for a 21-day ceasefire along the Israeli-Lebanese border.
Just the fact that Israel may be now launching a limited operation into Lebanon, are you aware of that? Are you comfortable with their plans?
I'm more aware than you might know, and I'm comfortable with them stopping. We should have a ceasefire now. Thank you.
And joining us for further clarity, currently Glenn Carl, former Deputy National Intelligence Officer for Transnational Threats. This actually includes terrorism on the National Intelligence Council. He's also a career CIA officer. Thank you so much, sir, for making time for us. Other Iranian proxies they are currently saying they have essentially the Houthis in Yemen or the militia groups it backs in Syria and Iraq. They could try to hit Israeli targets or sites closer to home, like nearby US military bases. There are many concerns at this point, many questions more than answers. Another pivotal, dangerous moment for a region that's seen so many of them in the last few weeks.
Well, what Israel seems to be doing in the last couple of weeks, in particular in the last week, is targeting Iran's proxies. The Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas has been the case for, of course, almost a year in Gaza. And there have been a few strikes by Israel in Syria against Iranian proxies and soldiers. The surprise has been the dramatic success so far, the tactical brilliance and success of the Israeli intelligence services and military in the first week or 2 weeks of this operation against Hezbollah, and so far the relative impotence of Hezbollah. That has changed, it appears, the strategic equation between Hezbollah, Israel, and Iran, and may change the strategic equation and considerations in the Middle East, as Iran's proxies are being materially weakened rather than just the tit-for-tat exchange. That's the big surprise.
But sir, how do you see Joe Biden's call for ceasefire when Israel is preparing for a ground invasion? Currently, they say it's a limited ground incursion, but how do you see the current situation?
Of course, who would not want a ceasefire? And war always risks destabilizing more than the initial objectives of whoever initiates the combat. And so it is a sensible step to call for, given the dangers of a broader war in the Middle East, of course. Straightforward. That's true. I mean, it's a bit like the Pope or an imam someplace calling for peace and brotherly love. Words cost nothing and affect little when a nation is using its military. So it sets a position and diplomatically, but the practical effect is slight. Yes, that's true, certainly.
Well, amid heightened tensions in the Middle East, Benjamin Netanyahu has also issued a rare direct message to the Iranian people, stating that Israel stands with them as it fights the proxies of Tehran, like the Lebanon-based Hezbollah militant group. Sir, do you see Iran actually pushing itself forward and getting involved in a full-blown conflict with Israel, or will it still hold back? How do you see it play out?
Well, that's been every analyst's fear and the apprehension for years, in particular since last October, concerning the clash in Gaza and in the Middle East in general. That the war would widen, involve Iran, or Iran would become involved, which would then involve probably the United States and Turkey and other nations and so on. But Iran has consistently signaled from the beginning of the Gaza war that it doesn't have any interest in widening the war. The saying, of course, that you probably have heard is that Iran is willing to fight to the last Hezbollah Lebanese or Sunni Hamas member, etc., but isn't willing to risk its own integrity as a state. And that seems to be the case, because what benefits can Iran gain from a clash with Israel, a direct clash? And the answer is probably zero. And the likelihood of serious negative consequences to Iran is certain. So Iran is in a difficult position. Its proxies are being weakened and being shown at present to be weaker than everyone had believed, at least Hezbollah for 2 weeks so far. And Iran is faced with the choice of doing nothing and losing some influence, or taking a military step, which endangers, I think, the regime's existence.
Well, I must inform our viewers, sir, that we have news coming in. Canada has now announced it has reserved about 800 seats on commercial flights to evacuate its citizens from Lebanon. Sir, do you see this blowing up further? Is it going to get much worse before it gets better?
Well, the ground forces is the big next qualitative change that there could be, I think. It appears so far that the Israelis are trying to keep in mind a lesson learned painfully in 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon and pushed the then PLO 30 kilometers away from the border to the Litani River. And that's probably an objective that they would have now, which is to create a buffer of about 30 kilometers to the Litani River, is my guess. But without having to introduce the significant numbers of ground troops, which would open Israel to much more vulnerability than currently is the case.
Well, Glenn Carl, thank you so much for joining us on the World 24/7 with your perspective. Really appreciate it. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Modi has spoken to the Israeli Prime Minister and called for avoiding regional escalation of the West Asian conflict. During the phone call that came days after Israel killed Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut, Prime Minister Modi has extended support for Israel's fight against terrorism. In fact, our Prime Minister has said he's spoken to Prime Minister Netanyahu about recent developments in West Asia. Terrorism has no place in our world, he added. It is crucial to prevent regional escalation and ensure the safe release of all hostages. India is committed to supporting efforts for an early restoration of peace and stability. My colleague Vishal Vivek has been tracking the latest developments for us. He joins us live at the moment. Vishal, as we have been discussing with our colleague Ghazali as well, Prime Minister Modi had even met Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas on the sidelines of the UNGA, appealing for peace and supporting a two-state solution. Now he got on a call and dialed Mr. Netanyahu. Put this in context for our viewers.
So this has been going on for about last 1 year, 1 to 2 years actually. So it was the meeting with President Putin 2 years ago when Prime Minister Modi said that this is not a time for war. So he has been going on these trips and, speaking with these world leaders and telling them that, regional escalation and they should take some steps to avoid these escalations. And this is not a time for war. And he, as you mentioned, he met the president of Palestine, Mahmoud Abbas, at UNGA. He also met the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, and he spoke on the same lines, and he's speaking on the similar lines for the last 2 to 3 years, and appealing to the world leaders for world peace. And this has been reciprocated by other world leaders. They have been receiving these comments made by Prime Minister Modi in a positive way, and they have said that if there is anyone who can actually bring peace to these regions, it's actually PM Modi. Particularly when we speak about Ukraine, he has been appealing for peace there, and many experts believe that it is actually PM Modi who can bring peace to the region. And on the same lines he's spoken to now Prime Minister Netanyahu. It was not as direct as the comments made before by Prime Minister Modi, but this also falls in the same category as to an appeal for peace. And as you know, 1,000 people have been killed already in the last 1 week in Lebanon. So this peace process actually needs to be furthered by many other world leaders as well.
Indeed. Thanks so much, Vishal, as always, for joining us with that update. Well, let's switch tracks now. In a significant diplomatic milestone, Jamaican Prime Minister Andrew Holness is making the first ever bilateral visit by a Jamaican Prime Minister to India. He's going to be in the country till the 3rd of October, and this visit symbolizes an important moment not only in the evolving relationship between India and Jamaica, but also for India's growing engagement with the Caribbean community. Now, with a number of MOUs expected to be signed, this visit promises to deepen bilateral cooperation and enhance economic and cultural ties. We are told while the two leaders have met on several occasions during multilateral events, this is actually the first dedicated bilateral visit. A quick update from Russia now. Well, Russia will drastically increase its military spending in 2025. This is according to draft budget documents we've accessed. The planned 23% budget increase to $145 billion will exceed the country's combined expenditure on education, healthcare, and social policies. Just imagine that. The hike confirms that Moscow has switched to a war footing. This is what Russian outlet The Bell has written, citing analysts, and that the Kremlin will make the military a top funding priority regardless of when the war in Ukraine ends. Vladimir Putin recently ordered the army to add 180,000 troops and bring its total active force to 1.5 million, which would make Russia's military the world's second largest after China's. The budget increase could help pay for those recruits while also avoiding the need for another unpopular conscription push. And since we mentioned China, let's get you a quick update from there as well. Chinese stocks rose sharply, their biggest gain since 2008 on Monday, as investors cheered Beijing's massive stimulus package. In fact, Indian stocks, which have benefited from the anxiety around China's economy, dropped, while Wall Street had an unusually muted reaction. US traders' lack of excitement underscored Beijing's limited role as an engine for America's economy, and the sense among analysts that deeper fiscal stimulus is needed to sustain a larger turnaround, analysts noted. But Monday's rally in China, which saw stocks worth about $143 billion trade hands in a 35-minute span, preceded the country's Golden Week holiday. Now, while local governments will begin distributing vouchers to boost spending, tourism during the typically busy travel period is still expected to be sluggish this year. Well, news and updates continue in a moment right here on NDTV 24/7. Don't go anywhere.
लोन मिलेगा या नहीं, ये आपके क्रेडिट स्कोर पे डिपेंड करता है। तो आज ही अपना क्रेडिट स्कोर चेक करें फ्री में पैसाबाजार.com पर। लोन की जरूरत कभी भी किसी को भी पड़ सकती है।
ठीक से एक्टिंग नहीं।
पैसाबाजार.com।
New day, new show, a new experience.
Start your day with the news, not views.
We bring you stories that matter
And impact your life.
news that informs and keeps you ahead. From Maximum City, Mumbai,
To the seat of power, Delhi.
NDTV brings you the best breakfast show.
Breakfast news on NDTV, 8 a.m. every day.
लोन मिलेगा या नहीं, ये आपके क्रेडिट स्कोर पे डिपेंड करता है। तो आज ही पैसाबाजार.com पर जाइए और अपना क्रेडिट स्कोर चेक कीजिए फ्री में, क्योंकि लोन की जरूरत कभी भी किसी को भी पड़ सकती है।
बस एक्टिंग करा लो इनसे।
पैसाबाजार.com, क्रेडिट स्कोर चेक, आदत अच्छी है।
Stay informed and entertained with the new and updated NDTV News app. You can watch all our channels live, listen to podcasts, read breaking and exclusive news from around the world and more. Download the NDTV app today and get access to the best journalism and storytelling on your smartphone or tablet. The NDTV app. News that matters to you.
Election sunrise is on the proverbial paradise. Jammu and Kashmir gets set to vote in assembly elections after a gap of 10 years.
For the BJP, it's a referendum on Article 370. For the Congress and regional parties, it's a battle for survival. An election that will go down in the history. Watch the most comprehensive, the most nuanced, and the most power-packed coverage only on NDTV.
For every news from every part of the country, डाउनलोड कीजिए NDTV ऐप। सिर्फ एक ऐप जो आपको बताता है क्या हो रहा है इन द वर्ल्ड ऑफ बिजनेस, पॉलिटिक्स, स्पोर्ट्स एंड एंटरटेनमेंट। देखना ना भूले हमारी मूवी युद्रा इन द थिएटर। रीड ऑल अबाउट युद्रा ऑन द NDTV ऐप। सो डाउनलोड नाउ।
लोन मिलेगा या नहीं, ये आपके क्रेडिट स्कोर पे डिपेंड करता है। आज ही जाइए पैसाबाजार.com पर और अपना क्रेडिट स्कोर चेक कीजिए फ्री में, क्योंकि लोन की जरूरत किसी को भी कभी भी पड़ सकती है।
चल एक्टिंग थोड़ा भेल बनो।
ए आयो भाग जोर। पैसाबाजार.com।
The nerves and the nature of the United States. Meanwhile, the vice presidential debate between Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Senator J.D. Vance is today, 5 weeks before Election Day. Why does it matter? Well, the CBS News debate is the first and only time Tim Walz and J.D. Vance will go face-to-face ahead of the November election in the United States.
It is great to be
In other news, Japan's new Prime Minister will be sworn in today with plans to call an October 27th snap election 1 year earlier than required. Analysts say the unusual move by Shigeru Ishiba, who won a close party leadership race to replace the unpopular Fumio Kishida, is aimed at swiftly uniting his polarized party and giving the opposition less time to prepare. As Ishiba campaigns to win a public mandate in the general election in Japan, he'll face immediate internal and external challenges, especially on the economy. Stocks in Japan tumbled ahead of his swearing in what economists described as the Ishiba shock. But the yen strengthened since he is seen as a monetary policy hawk. This is what a Japan politics expert has argued. And a Himalayan river may be making Everest taller. Mount Everest is 15 to 50 meters taller than it would otherwise be because the river is eroding rock and soil at its base, helping push it upwards according to a new study. The loss of landmass in the Arun River basin, 75 kilometers away, is causing the world's highest peak to rise by up to 2 mm a year. This is what University College London researchers have found. Well, and few countries have been more associated with coal than Britain, where the black rock has been part of the economy and the culture for more than 200 years. But on Monday, that era came to an end. Britain's last coal-fired power station shut down for good at midnight, making Britain the first G7 country to completely wean itself off coal to generate electricity. Now, several countries have phased out coal for electric power, such as Sweden and Belgium, but Britain will be the first major industrialized country who's done so. Canada has pledged to end its reliance on coal-fired electricity, meanwhile, by the year 2030. Well, thank you for investing your time and watching this edition of The World 24/7. We'll keep tracking the latest updates for you. Do stay tuned.
Hello, Moto.
Motorola Razr 50 Ultra comes with Google Gemini.
A Himalayan river may be making Everest taller. In fact, Mount Everest is 15 to 50 meters taller than it would otherwise be because the river is eroding rock and soil at its base, helping push it upwards according to a new study published.
लोन मिलेगा या नहीं, ये आपके क्रेडिट स्कोर पे डिपेंड करता है। तो आज ही अपना क्रेडिट स्कोर चेक करें फ्री में पैसाबाजार.com पर। लोन की जरूरत कभी भी किसी को भी पड़ सकती है।
ठीक से एक्टिंग नहीं।
पैसाबाजार.com।
New day, new show, a new experience.
Start your day with the news, not views.
We bring you stories that matter
and impact your life.
News that informs and keeps you ahead.
From Maximum City, Mumbai,
to the seat of power, Delhi,
NDTV brings you the best breakfast show.
breakfast news on NDTV, 8 a.m. every day.
लोन मिलेगा या नहीं, ये आपके क्रेडिट स्कोर पे डिपेंड करता है। तो आज ही पैसाबाजार.com पर जाइए और अपना क्रेडिट स्कोर चेक कीजिए फ्री में, क्योंकि लोन की जरूरत कभी भी किसी को भी पड़ सकती है।
बस एक्टिंग करा लो इनसे।
पैसाबाजार.com, क्रेडिट स्कोर चेक, आदत अच्छी है।
Stay informed and entertained with the new and updated NDTV News app. You can watch all our channels live, listen to podcasts, read breaking and exclusive news from around the world and more. Download the NDTV app today and get access to the best journalism and storytelling on your smartphone or tablet. The NDTV app. News that matters to you.
For every news from every part of the country, डाउनलोड कीजिए NDTV ऐप। सिर्फ एक ऐप जो आपको बताता है क्या हो रहा है इन द वर्ल्ड ऑफ बिजनेस, पॉलिटिक्स, स्पोर्ट्स एंड एंटरटेनमेंट। देखना ना भूलें हमारी मूवी युद्रा इन द थिएटर। रीड ऑल अबाउट युद्रा ऑन द NDTV ऐप। सो डाउनलोड नाउ।
लोन मिलेगा या नहीं, ये आपके क्रेडिट स्कोर पर डिपेंड करता है। आज ही जाइए पैसाबाजार.com पर और अपना क्रेडिट स्कोर चेक कीजिए फ्री में, क्योंकि लोन की जरूरत किसी को भी कभी भी पड़ सकती है।
चल एक्टिंग थोड़ा भेल बनो।
ए आयो भाग बोल। पैसाबाजार.com।
Some people say the metaverse will only be virtual. One day this lecture hall will be made of code, and driverless cars would be trapped in intersections. But even in this maze of the future, you can't wish away health. It's time to become more resilient.
T20 champions. We are going to give you an action-packed coverage for the next hour. Over to you, Kitty.
Yes, a lot is lined up for this breakfast edition, of course, for our viewers from Jammu Kashmir elections, for which voting is taking place for the third and final phase today, to the Supreme Court's wrap to the Delhi government over the National Capital's green cover, to much more, and a very interesting interview that's lined up in this edition. We'll get you all of that in just a bit. Let's start with the headlines. Polling underway for the final phase of elections in Jammu Kashmir. Elections in 40 seats taking place. Focus is on North Kashmir.
Karnataka Chief Minister Siddaramaia's wife offers to return land sites allotted to her in connection to the alleged Muda scam. This just after Enforcement Directorate files money laundering case against the Chief Minister.
India's young shooting stars clinched twin gold in Junior World Championships in Peru. Both men and women's team win in 10-meter air pistol event. Special showcase on Breakfast Show.
Supreme Court pulls up Delhi Forest Department over their lackluster approach in expanding capital's green cover.